Everyone loves a mystery. One of the greatest mysteries of the past is the enigma of the great megalith builders. How were they able to build these giant structures? Why do similar megalithic structures appear all over the world? Did the ancients build these structures with primitive tools, or did they use some sort of highly developed technology similar to our own? Modern-day explorer and researcher David Hatcher Childress is founder of the World Explorers Club, a group dedicated to uncovering the mysteries of past civilizations. David has been fascinated by the enigma of the megalith builders and the methods they may have used, whether ingeniously simple or highly complicated.
I expect to find in Peru the answers to some of the many enigmas of the megalithic engineering that's found in the Andes Mountains.
What has really struck me about the sites in Peru at Tiwanaku, Machu Picchu, is the enormous stonework that the ancients actually created. I've been fascinated with it. I'm absolutely enamored with Machu Picchu.
On previous trips to Peru, I have seen what are amazing enigmas with giant megalithic blocks perfectly cut and articulated what seems to be high-tech engineering far beyond what the ancient Incas were capable of doing.
In order to search out the answers to the enigma of the megalith builders around the world, David has decided to enlist the help of British engineer Christopher Dunn, a specialist in modern machining techniques.
The conventional theory of how the ancients cut stone and created these artifacts is the use of copper chisels or copper implements to use sand, bone, or wood, or actually use another stone and bash the rock. These methods just do not fit the evidence and cannot create those artifacts the way they were created. It's impossible to do that.
My first impression was, with very little historical background, that all this was done by hand. It was lapping and chiseling and took many hours, days, weeks. But after looking at some of the granite that I've seen, I question if it was even feasible to do by hand. And it kind of leads me into directions of thinking about the application of machine tools some time ago. There's multiple aspects involved here. Step one is, how do you cut this stuff thousands of years ago? How and with what? And then once you get it cut, for whatever reason, they've got precise corner breaks and fillet radiuses down lengths that are unexplained. But they obviously had something to inspect these characteristics, to assure things were parallel, to assure they were perpendicular. And that goes out into another branch that, just gets people thinking.
With the help of Christopher Dunn, David is determined to fly to Peru and take Chris to some of the megalithic sites in the Andes that he is familiar with to see what evidence of ancient high technology that they might be able to find. Along the way, we may learn some interesting historical facts concerning the mysteries of South American culture. All aboard for Peru! In the central Andes of Peru, David and Chris arrive in the ancient city of Cusco. It was used as the capital of the Inca Empire, which began around 900 AD and lasted until the Spanish conquest in 1531. But is Cusco really a city that predates the Incas by thousands of years?
As we go around and we see places, we'll be advancing the theory that Incas didn't build these walls and that they were already here in Inca times. Incas lived in these buildings, but they didn't build them. They were already standing here. This is the most famous stone in Cusco. It's the stone of the 12 angles. It's the stone that appears on the Cusco beer. And to a lot of people, this is like the symbol of Cusco, this stone particularly.
On a hill above Cusco can be found the massive walls of Sacsayhuamán, an edifice of imposing walls built with gigantic blocks of limestone that are perfectly fitted together. It is one of the most imposing sights in all of South America.
And one of the questions that you have to ask is why would anybody go to such extreme effort to build with such giant stones? It's not necessary. I mean, they could be building with much smaller stones, but here they're building with giant stones, and it's...
Well, they didn't have to put in as much effort as we would, that's why.
I think that's it. Yeah, and so the reason why they are building with such giant stones is because it was easy for them, not because it was hard.
Yeah.
This is a particularly unique rock here, and many people think that it has to do with the Kundalini serpent energy that's taught in ancient India, and that this whole figure here is of a snake, and we see pictures of snakes carved in the stones in Cuzco. This one is particularly unusual because it's very deep and large, carved into this granite, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chakras. It's thought that this corresponds to the Kundalini energy in your spine going up through your chakras here. What we find right here at the seat of the Inca, here at Sacsayhuamán, is that this seat right here is magnetized. And by bringing our compass along this stones right here, the compass is spinning. So there's a curious magnetic anomaly right here, some strong magnetic field that's either naturally in the rock or has somehow been artificially placed here. It's possible that this magnetic field actually has something to do with the moving of these giant stones.
We're looking at a processes or machine tools or tool bits anyway that's common to the builders of this facility, for want of a better word, the builders of this site, and what they were doing in Egypt.
If this was actually carved by a glacier that was smoothing it out, you have to wonder why you're going to have these rough parts here. If there had been a glacier actually carving this, it would have smoothed out this entire stone. And you wouldn't have these rough nods like this. You just wouldn't really have that. Look at this curious stone and how it has a channel going through it. It's almost as if at one point there was some like aqueduct kind of thing here, and that this big stone is all that's left, but maybe water was being channeled down and then through here and then would have come out this area. You know, why would there just be a solitary stone like this? There must have been other blocks fitted up against it. And here you can see how things here.
Water channel, yeah. Or something.
Now this block here is curious with its, again, precision corners, and then these scoops out. Now it's theorized, you know, by some people that these scoops were used in the construction of like ramming poles and stuff in here to hold up blocks while they're, you know, carefully chiseling them out. Yet not all the blocks have that, only some. And others, rather than having scoops, have knobs instead. Like there, you can see a couple of knobs up there. The theory is that these scoops and knobs were somehow used in the handling of the blocks. But again, exactly how they would have done it, it's a mystery. I mean, it's thought that it was just brute force. One of the strange things too with blocks like this is that in the traditional idea that they're constantly chiseling away to make it perfect, but that meant moving the blocks away, chiseling it a little bit, putting it back, seeing how it fit, moving it again, chipping it more, putting it back, and this constant trial and error of trying to get the blocks to fit right. I mean, it's really one of the great mysteries of how they were such incredible stonemasons that they would just make all of the blocks fit perfectly. And it was definitely part of their technique that this perfect fitting was very much their style, and they just weren't going to do it any other way. We're here at the top of Sacsayhuamán above Cusco, and this is the area where there used to be several tall towers. We only can see the bases of these towers now. They were destroyed by the Spanish. But it's kind of interesting that originally here at Sacsayhuamán, there were two very tall towers. We'll also find a tower like these at Machu Picchu. This was the main road going to the Sacred Valley. So as you were going to the Sacred Valley, you would stop here at Tambo Machay and then go on up this Inca road here, up over the mountains, and then you would come back down into the Sacred Valley to the towns of Pisac, Urubamba, Calca, Ollantaytambo. This gigantic block of granite, probably weighing several hundred tons, came from the quarry high above Ollantaytambo and across the river. It was squared, it was moved quite the distance towards the ruins, which are now just up here, but for some reason, this gigantic block never made it to the Sun Temple at Ollantaytambo. Behind me is the town of Ollantaytambo, and up this direction is the massive Sun Temple. In Inca times, there were only 3 megalithic cities that were inhabited during Inca times and are still inhabited today. Cusco is one of them, another town is called Chinchero, and the third is this town of Ollantaytambo. People are still living in the ancient buildings as they did in Inca times. Andesite blocks that comes from the top of the Sun Temple up there. It's been quarried. It's got even some drill holes here. It probably has fallen down from the top in the cataclysm that destroyed the Sun Temple in ancient times. This is part of the ramp that goes up the west side of the Sun Temple of Ollantaytambo, where they apparently dragged these massive stones. The lazy stones that never made it up to the temple that we just looked at are back down behind me over there. This is the very top of the main wall at the Sun Temple of Ollantaytambo. You can see how the narrow slivers of granite and the big blocks are perfectly fitted together up on top. There's a corresponding wall here. Yet we know that this is only some small portion of the gigantic building that was originally here. These giant blocks of red granite are exactly as they were in Spanish times and in Inca times as well. None of these blocks has probably moved an inch for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We see giant squared blocks of red andesite here. We see other blocks of red andesite there. This one probably weighing several hundred tons. But then we see this poor construction here. We see more of this poor construction here. We see this stone has been notched right here for another giant block. It's quite clear to me, really, that this is Inca construction here, while these giant blocks on either side are the megalithic pre-Inca construction that we're looking for. This is the main wall of the Sun Temple at Ollantaytambo. It consists of 6 giant slabs of andesite, and between them are these thin slivers of granite. You see here these giant knobs like this one, other curious knobs, and then here we have part of an Andean cross on this side of this slab. We also see here these knobs, more of these thin slivers of granite. Other knobs here, some have been chipped away. And then we come here to the edge of this massive wall, and we have this curious stone lying here. It appears to have been a lintel of a huge doorway that's fallen straight down. These giant blocks of red andesite granite didn't come from this site here that we're at. In fact, they came from this mountain on the other side of the river that's many miles away. The quarry on this mountain up here is massive blocks of granite that have come down from the mountain, almost like they've been blasted off of this granite mountain. Many of them are squared high up in the mountain and then brought by trails down for many miles, and then they have to cross the river, then come back up this mountain here at the Sun Temple of Ollantaytambo, and then are put into place. This is an engineering feat that is perhaps unequaled in mankind, bringing massive blocks of granite many miles and across a river, up another mountain, and then perfectly placed where we see them today. It's almost a superhuman effort. This block is particularly interesting because it has what we call keystone cuts on it. Keystone cuts are these T-shaped cuts in the stone, and then another stone is fitted against this with a corresponding T-shaped cut, and then a copper clamp or some other metal is poured into these grooves, forming what's called a keystone cut. We find these unusual keystone cuts also at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, which is an admittedly pre-Inca building. We also find keystone cuts like this in ancient Egypt, in ancient Turkey, in ancient Greece, and in other parts of the world.
When you're talking about a later culture coming in and working with these blocks, that's the technology they had. Very, very small elements, easy to handle. I mean, you see it today, that's how they build their houses.
That's right. So, I mean, that's part of the point here, is that someone was able to build with giant blocks of stone. And,
oh yeah, very easily.
yeah, and it
Obviously.
wasn't hard for them, but,
No.
but that probably wasn't the Incas doing that.
Well, if this is Inca, again, if the lower part is Inca, then this isn't.
This giant block of andesite appears to have been standing up and was pushed over onto this platform that was made for it. Here we see slabs that are still in place. They're weighing hundreds of tons, perfectly fitted together. Joints are perfect. We have this curious raised bit of stone here in the central part. More knobs here and more fitting here. But what this wall was originally, we really have no idea. Here again we have one of the unusual keystone cuts that's been cut into this block, and of course naturally another giant block would have been fitted against it with a corresponding keystone cut on this side. The Incas were really not known for building with keystone cuts. This is something that instead we find at Tiwanaku. This wall right here at the Sun Temple of Ollantaytambo is actually extremely important. You see these quite large blocks of andesite here. You see the poor construction of filler right here. This is the Inca construction. But most importantly, we see this keystone cut here on this block. We only have one half of a keystone cut, and this is extremely important because there's no way that the original builders of this wall would ever have cut a keystone cut here and not have another wall attached to it with a corresponding keystone cut. And in fact, this block had to have originally have been horizontal, because a keystone cut cannot be poured on a vertical block like this. It's absolutely clear to me that this wall itself has been destroyed and reconstructed, all in prehistory, before the Spanish. Probably the builders who reconstructed this wall were even pre-Inca themselves, and later the Incas came in and filled in with this mud mortar construction we see here. Yeah, this wall right here is one of the most perfect walls. It's very famous here at Ollantaytambo. Has a lot of the polygonal jigsaw cutting and fitting of the blocks. One of the reasons for this is it provides more surface area for the blocks to lock in together and creates a great deal more stability for these gigantic walls. You have to wonder too why they wanted this. They clearly, as they built such walls like this was important to them, that they had these little notches and corners that were fitting in together. It was to keep them from being uniform, and by providing extra surface area, the blocks held together better during the many Andean earthquakes that are so severe. This great doorway here is also quite interesting. It's built out of quite large blocks of granite weighing many tens of tons. And then here you see the articulation of the blocks coming in, very uniform, coming down to the corners. This is extremely fine construction, some of the finest construction ever in the world. These fine granite blocks here at Ollantaytambo are also curious for this corner here, where the blocks have actually been carved around this corner and then notched and fitted here perfectly. This is quite curious construction, and something we also see in Egypt at the Valley Temple of Khafre and at the Osirion and other areas of Egypt that are thought to be pre-Inca.
Okay, this stone right here, while it does not actually display the extreme precision that we find on the stones in Egypt, it's still a considerable amount of work to create this. It's fairly flat along the surface, and they went through a considerable amount of time and work putting this notch in. For what reason? That's a mystery. We checked the corner radius on that other block, and we find the same condition or the same radius in this one. And again, the thing to really point out is that these were used for construction purposes. The kind of precision that we find in Egypt, they must have had a much higher purpose, a technological purpose. And even though we may say, okay, for water management or hydraulic management, that is a technological purpose, and these blocks may have had some function in a hydraulic device. The precision, you don't need that kind of precision for hydraulics. I get the impression that we have a lot of anomalous carving on the face of the mountain. You see these niches cut into the mountain. For what reason? I don't know. But if you take it into consideration with what we find in Egypt, where there's an advanced acoustic technology, it's almost like they were carving the mountain out to tune it to particular frequencies. And perhaps these were acoustic horns that were left in the face of the rock. But for what other reason? I mean, what reason would they have to do this work? Well, to get a corner radius like this, you would have to use a tool that has a dimension of 5/8 of an inch, because what we have is a 5/16 radius. So typically, if you were working with stone to create these artifacts, the work that it would take to actually go from a larger radius, which obviously you would have to use a larger tool to start with, and then come down to this smaller radius, there would have to be some significant purpose in order to do that, because the amount of work involved is tremendous. And that's not to say that they couldn't have done it, but I have my doubts. I mean, the volume of work that we see around here, it certainly indicates that they had a very efficient way of performing this work.
On the trail going up to the megalithic quarry high above Ollantaytambo, where the big blocks of granite are. This is our guide, Mario. Speaks pretty good English and, of course, fluent in Quechua. He's from the village of Ollantaytambo, and he's studying to be a tourist guide. According to Mario, this is one of the tired stones. One of the stones coming from the quarry up on the mountain that was supposed to go down to the river and then up the other side to the Sun Temple at Ollantaytambo. For some reason, this one didn't make it. It's one of the smaller stones, actually, but it still weighs many tons. So you have to wonder, why would the Incas, or even the pre-Inca stonemasons, want to come up here on top of this mountain and then quarry these 100-ton, 200-ton, 500-ton blocks of granite, and then with some superhuman effort just drag them miles down this mountain, across a river, and then up the mountain on the other side to the Sun Temple? I mean, it makes you think, could it have been actually easy for them to do this rather than so incredibly difficult as it would appear? So this giant block of granite here in the quarry has already been partially split open. They're trying to separate this part of the rock. This giant block right here has also been cut or chipped away and moved. Here you see the splitting of the rock here. This is part of the quarrying process. Here are several very large pieces of granite that have been quarried here. They've obviously been squared into big long rectangles. They're probably weighing 10 or 15 tons. For some reason, the stonemasons never moved these rocks down to the bottom. We've walked over 4 hours up here to this giant granite quarry. Here's another one of the stones that's been roughly squared, ready to be moved. You just have to wonder, why would they go through such difficult process. What motivated them to move such giant blocks of stone? They could have easily have built with much smaller blocks, which would have been much more easy to move. But as we've seen, they wanted to build with giant megalithic blocks. According to many archaeologists, the Incas didn't know about the wheel and they didn't have writing. But here we find actually a giant stone wheel with a hole in the middle. What was it used for? Was it actually part of moving the giant blocks? It's one of the mysteries here at the quarry. This is one of the giant blocks of granite that's been hewn here at the quarry. This one weighs many hundreds of tons. And in fact, we can see a saw mark here where the stonemasons were beginning to cut pieces of this block away.